Godzilla Minus One was an amazing movie. It was also right-wing propaganda, and I love it. On a surface level, the movie had so much right-wing values. Traditional family, traditional gender roles, and even a message of the people must overcome their own problems instead of the government, a very big talking point among conservative and libertarian circles. The film centered around a nuclear family. This is where the film's pro-life messaging starts. You see, there was a young girl named Noriko who was escaping a bombing run the US was doing in Japan, and a dying mother was holding a baby and begged Noriko to take the baby and raise it as her own. Noriko selflessly became a mother for a child she didn't even know. This is femininity at its finest. Sometime in recent history here in the West, we've let women characters become a holy cow that no one can touch. We saw that in Star Wars Episode 7 with the castration of Luke Skywalker, and the idolization of a character who, in my opinion, was really unrelatable and, for some reason, overly infallible. This problem is definitely not just exclusive to Star Wars. But in Japan, they got it right. They kept women where they belong. In the kitchen cooking tasty food for their husband and his friends. They actually did a really great job of showing feminine strength as well. You see, when Godzilla struck, Noriko was in a train and Godzilla lifted it high into the air and started to shake it violently. The people spilled out, but Noriko actually clung onto a pole. Despite Godzilla's colossal strength, Noriko somehow clung for her life. It actually made sense though. You see, she wasn't just clinging on for herself, but really for her baby and the man who would become her husband. I'd say overall, Noriko was objectively better than the husband Hoichi, but ultimately, she helped him to grow and have the same optimistic attitude she had, and overcome the nightmare of war. He was still haunted by the things he saw as a kamikaze pilot. Every character seemed to have one of two paradigms, that of Noriko, which was hopeful and trying to preserve life, or that of Hoichi, which was gloomy and had a death wish. When we talk about the original Godzilla, most people think of Godzilla as representing the bombs dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That analysis is correct, but there's a lot of layers to the symbolism, and it does get a little complicated. Godzilla in 1985 actually had a different meaning. He represented the threat of nuclear war between the Soviet Union and the United States. And Shin Godzilla represented the meltdown at Fukushima. I believe that Godzilla and Godzilla Minus One also has a very different meaning from the other Godzillas. Godzilla is generally considered an external threat of some other group. This Godzilla actually seems to represent an internal threat, the threat of a reckless government which didn't value the life of its citizens. The biggest evidence of this comes when a scientist was rallying the people up together to fight against Godzilla. He told them all to go home and enjoy the night with their families. A man blurted out, "Because you think we're going to die?" The scientist responded, "No, because I want you to have a reason to live." He then went on to say that Japan needed to do things differently, to value life more, that during the war it wasn't good people were compelled to commit suicide, that there weren't ejection seats in planes, and that poor planning by government and military leaders led to more civilian deaths through starvation and disease than the devastation that was brought on directly by the Americans. I don't really know about the historicity of all that, but I did find it really interesting. Because the movie was making it clear that what they were fighting here wasn't actually the devastation that the United States had brought, but it was actually something else. Perhaps a mentality that the people of Japan had. This would explain why they were fighting Godzilla years after the war. It was explained that the government itself could not fight against Godzilla and that this responsibility would lie solely on the people. As previously mentioned, there were one of two paradigms in this movie, the pro-life category of people who were wanting to sort of eliminate this culture of not valuing life and promoting suicide and such, and another group of people who had a bit of a death wish and were very gloomy about things and not as optimistic. At the end of the film, however, all the characters adopt the paradigm of Noriko of wanting to be pro-life and have an optimistic attitude about the future. The film wasn't really about the devastation brought by the Americans, but actually more about the devastation of war, which ultimately stemmed from the Japanese government, who hadn't esteemed life and started the war to begin with. The people henceforth had to band together as a society and destroy this monster on their own, without the help of the government. Overall, the movie was really great, and I loved how it depicted not just femininity, but also masculinity as well. Hoichi ended up growing to be a very brave person, someone who lived his life not for himself, but his family, those who he most loved. At the movie's end, there were actually a few people around me who were crying, and I walked away wanting to become a better person. I sort of saw Hoichi as a role model of the type of man I would like to become. It's easy to count apples, but not so easy to tell what makes them good. In that light, it's always hard to measure a movie, but I think the threshold of a good work of art to becoming a masterpiece lies solely on whether or not the creator could connect with the audience on this profound emotional level.